Hi, welcome. We're here with another alumni for our Alumni Spotlight of the Week. We have Kevin, who's really transformed the type of business he's done. He was used to be an advanced person on the field, in person, and once COVID hit, he transformed it into an online version. And we're going to learn a lot about tips, insights, and more about how he made that transition from being a staffer physically in a campaign to now digitally. So Kevin, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm excited to talk a little bit about virtual events.
Awesome. So Kevin, kind of give us a little bit about your background. How did you get involved in politics? What have you been doing? And then we could talk about a little bit more about what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I've been producing events for about a decade, mostly in the world of TEDx, so like TED Talks on a local level. And through that, I sort of got plugged into a lot of different networks and organizations, and I became more politically active. I would say the last 2 or 3 years, as I started learning about how politics affects people's daily lives. So I joined the Bernie Sanders campaign in, I think, mid 2019 to do advance work. So going out into the field and helping to set up events, both that the campaign was planning and prepare the senator for appearances that he would make at external events, such as town halls organized by some organization. And I did advance work on the campaign for maybe 5, maybe 6 months. And then I worked on the campaign's scheduling team, so the sort of back end before you get to advance, where we were doing a lot of project management and sort of coordinating of logistics and people's schedules and making sure that we can be at the right places at the right times. And I think at one point we had over like 2,500 event invitations that we were keeping track of, between things that were for the senator to attend versus things that were for other staff to attend. And so I was sort of overseeing that operation of making sure that we knew how to process those invitations and then where they would get triaged to, and who would be responsible to attend those. So towards the end of the campaign, I had the chance to be part of a small live stream that we did that was one of the pre-debate live streams. I think it was just Biden versus Bernie at that point. And I had done some live streaming work in the past, but that sort of opened my eyes to the fact that, oh, this is like a job that you can do full time, and you can even do it in politics, and this is like a viable career field. So after the campaign, I started getting more plugged in with groups that were producing virtual events, both politically focused and just sort of apolitical, and I started doing more and more virtual events. I started out as a backstage manager, meaning like someone who would prepare live speakers in a Zoom or some other environment where you're recording a live event to speak. And then I started doing more technical direction, which is where you're responsible for the overall production tech-wise for the event. So thinking through, are we going to use Zoom or YouTube as the platform for our audience to watch an event? Or, if we're using YouTube or Facebook, where do captions come in? Or can we play, royalty-free music? Or do we have to, play certain music that has certain copyrights? So it's those details all the way to the communication with the client and making sure that they know all the restrictions and limitations of particular platforms. Over the last 6 to 8 months, there's been a huge boom, as you're probably aware, in capabilities that platforms like Zoom, Google Meet are starting to add in, just because everyone is going online, and I think it's really pushed them to to innovate and push their industry forward. But yeah, so now most of my work is as a technical director and executive producer, so working with clients to execute their vision and turn it into a reality, and transform what may have previously been an in-person event into a live virtual event.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
That takes a lot of foresight and a lot of dedication to completely almost shift what have been doing for a while. Let's talk about what can a smaller campaign do? You've been to Arena Academy, you worked with a number of campaigns. Let's say if I'm running for a state-led campaign, what advice would you give that person to transition to an online fundraiser or online meet and greet?
Yeah. So It's difficult to think about virtual events as just sort of a standard in-person event, but shifted online. So you shouldn't think of say like a convention as with all of these different booths that you'll typically have at a convention and all these different ballrooms and networking areas and lunch and whatever, as just being able to be shifted over to a Zoom or Zoom-like platform. Instead, you should really think of the type of event that you're doing as totally different, in which case you'll need to change the content somewhat to make it match that platform and environment. So a great example is duration. Like, you can get away with a conference that's like 3 or 4 days, maybe even a week, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks in some cases, but online, it's much more difficult to reproduce that same format or that same amount of content at least. So an example is the TED conference. So normally the TED conference runs for around a week, maybe 2 weeks sometimes, depending on the actual event. And I'm talking about the sort of main TED conference that happens in Vancouver every year. They have one that's called the Big TED Conference, and then they have like TED Women, TED Active, a few other ones. But the main one happens once a year, and it's about a week. So what they did this year was, rather than playing for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for their entire global audience, a stream of TED Talks, I think they chose one day out of the week. I think it might have been like Thursdays or something. And they chose a time zone that worked for maybe 80 or 90% of their audience. And they just screened talks during those like 2 or 3 hour block windows. And that's something that you can also do if you're thinking of putting on some kind of long form event as a campaign. Now, if we're thinking about shorter form events rather, there are definitely fundraisers or concerts or performances that you can do that would feel more like a traditional in-person event. So I did an event a few weeks ago on Labor Day with a candidate who's running for a state house seat in Pennsylvania. And we had a mix of folk performers, everyone from guitarists to, we had a band and a harpist. A mix of those performances plus testimonials from those performers, telling the whole world why they support this candidate. One of the most important aspects from organizing that virtual event was that we kept the testimonials to about 2 or 3 minutes in length, and we kept the performances to about 6 to 10 minutes in length. And people online tend to get tired of talking heads pretty quickly, and even more so than in person. So it was really critical to make sure that everyone knew that they had a super short time frame in which they could convey their points. And for the most part, people were saying more or less the same thing. So it wasn't really critical that we give them 5 or 10 minutes to bring up some new idea. And the whole event, I think, lasted, I don't know, I think it was like an hour and a half or so. And I think we even ran under our scheduled time, which is always great. And I think we had about like a 95% retention rate for the whole event. So only, I think, 2 or 3 people dropped off towards the end of the event, but most people stayed on the whole time. And I think that was definitely as a result of us keeping it relatively short and concise. You can definitely do things that are even shorter. So you could have an event that's like 30 or 45 minutes if you have really quick, segments with speakers and performances and whatever else. And I think that's just as feasible and just as effective as like a 1.5, 2 hour long event, depending on what your goal is. And I think for that event, we raised, I think between $2,000 to $3,000, if I'm not misremembering. And between each of the segments, so we would do, for instance, like a performance and then a testimonial and then another performance. So between each one of those, we would have the candidate go up and speak and maybe thank one of the performers, or show a progress bar on the screen that had a link to donate, plus the amount of money that they fundraised.
And how many people you had working that event, like as like maybe a Zoom host, someone in the green room? Like, how many people are you talking about?
Yeah, so that was a pretty simple event. So it was just 2 people, plus the candidate who was also kind of the host. So in some cases we might count them as sort of crew, but in this case they weren't. So I had myself. So I was doing, I was filling the role of what's called a streaming engineer, meaning the person who's responsible for producing the composited or the sort of compiled set of graphics that are shown on screen. So for instance, you might have a link plus a progress bar plus a headshot plus a bio and a description or something. And those are all elements that you can put together in a program like OBS or Wirecast that's known as a compositing or live streaming program. And as a streaming engineer, I was responsible for switching between the different elements. So, at one point we might show a title card that says, welcome to the event, we're going to get started in 5 minutes. At another point, we might show like a slide that has a countdown timer on it. And then we might show like a progress bar or whatever the case might be. So I'm kind of switching between those different, what are called scenes or layouts, and making sure that flow is working. And then on the back end, I had a backstage manager who was responsible for monitoring the Q&A of Zoom, which was where most of the attendees were. And then we also streamed it out to Facebook. So she was also looking on Facebook chat for any comments or questions there. And then she was also queuing up the candidate about 15 to 20 seconds before they were set to speak. So typically what we'll do is I will be the show caller, meaning the person who's looking at the schedule for the event and making sure that things are going according to plan and to schedule. And I'll call out cues. I'll say, okay, we have 15 seconds until this video is done. Go ahead and cue the performer that they're going to be up next and unmute them. And that's how the person will know, oh, I'm being unmuted. That means I'm going to be up in 15 seconds. And that's something that we'll review with the speakers ahead of time. So for that smaller show, we had 2 people, myself and a backstage manager.
And what's your preferred platform of choice? Like, what's the easiest to stream on Facebook and YouTube and get all these designs on screen from your experience?
Yeah, so it really depends on the event, but I think if you're a smaller campaign doing something simple, I think Zoom is fine. If you want an even simpler option with the ability to show what are called lower thirds, which are those sort of bars that you see at the bottom of the screen that might have someone's name or something, and you have maybe a more complex speaker setup, like you only have maybe Zoom would be more appropriate for if you have one person speaking at a time and you're not really doing much screen sharing or maybe panels, things like that. Zoom is typically okay. Otherwise, if you're doing anything more complex, I would say try out StreamYard. That can be operated by like one person. So if you have just the campaign manager who's kind of the producer and the director and the show caller, like all in one, they can use StreamYard to basically do everything that I described. There's not as much room for customization, so you can't really brand everything exactly to how you might want it, and maybe you don't have the font that you want to use, or maybe the exact color that you want to use. But in general, I think it'll suffice. So I would recommend either of those 2. If you are using Zoom, there's currently no ability to add chyrons or lower thirds onto a Zoom stream, so you would have to use something like OBS to add those in, and the sort of setup does get more complex in that scenario. So that's sort of what I would recommend there for simpler campaigns and events.
And let's talk a little bit about before the event, the actual lead up. For in-person event, you're like running around, making sure that the newspaper has the event headlines.
Yeah.
What are some of the similarities and differences between having a physical, let's say, town hall and a virtual town hall?
Yeah. So I would say the first one is that rehearsal is a must. And for town halls, maybe you don't do rehearsals, but you do sort of an advanced walkthrough where you might see, okay, where's the candidate going to be sitting? How many questions are they going to be asked? Is there a podium? Those sorts of things. But for events that you as a campaign are planning that are sort of all internal, where who the speakers are and that you'll have them 5 or 10 minutes ahead of time, or maybe even a few days ahead of time, a rehearsal is definitely a must. So with good rehearsal comes good planning. So you want to plan out that run of show, meaning your schedule that includes every single technical cue and everything that possibly might have to be done during an event in that schedule. So that's everything from making sure that the Zoom meeting settings are appropriate, all the way to noting when you have to spotlight a particular speaker or turn off their mic or video. So in an in-person event, you normally wouldn't have the issue of someone's dog barking during the middle of a speech. But in Zoom world, obviously that's totally different. So one example is that you would make sure that as soon as someone stops speaking, you mute them and maybe even turn their video off if there's some reason to do that. And then if you mute them, it means you have to unmute them right before they speak. So then that means adding a line into your schedule that says, unmute Chris 15 seconds before he goes on. And then if you're doing both of those things, it means you have to communicate that to the speakers and tell them, hey, in your green room 5 or 10 minutes before, after you receive the notification that says, hey, either I'm asking you to unmute or I've unmuted you, that means that you are going to be live in less than 15 seconds. So make sure that your camera ready, meaning that you have your appropriate attire on and you're not drinking water and whatever else is necessary. So rehearsal is definitely critical, and there are 2 types of rehearsals. There's one that's known as a tech rehearsal, and that's where you'll just make sure that all of the technology is working from start to finish. So, if you're using Zoom as your platform where you're capturing the footage, maybe you live stream that out to Facebook, and during your tech rehearsal, you'll make sure that you know how to switch between all of your speakers on Zoom. So you'll practice spotlighting one person and then another person, and then switching to gallery view, and then switching to back to speaker spotlight view, and then streaming all of that out to Facebook and watching on Facebook and making sure that those are the desired results that you're seeing on Facebook. So the way that Zoom works is, as the host, when you live stream your Zoom meeting out to Facebook, it shows on Facebook exactly what you see as the host. And they're sort of tweaking these settings here and there. So recently Zoom added the ability to rearrange the order of speakers in a Zoom meeting. But for the most part, it's going to be that. So you as the host are seeing what you are broadcasting out to your viewers. But you always want to double check to make sure that what I'm seeing on Facebook is the exact same thing that I'm seeing on Zoom. And what I actually do during shows is I'll have 2 or 3 devices open, and one of them is going to be my main computer where I'm doing most of the switching. And then another one will be my schedule that I'm following to make sure that everything is going according to plan. And then the third one is going to have the live output that all of my viewers at home are seeing. And that allows me to be super sure that everything is according to my expectations. And then another thing that is similar is communication. So you'll typically have a walkie-talkie or a signal chat or whatever open during an in-person event. When you're doing virtual events, you can use back-channel communication systems like Unity. So Unity is a tool that allows production crew members to talk to each other during an event. And it's similar to having like a group FaceTime audio call running, and that's sort of the budget option. So if you don't want to pay for that, that's totally acceptable. Having like a FaceTime audio or maybe a Google Meet audio call or something. The reason why it's important to keep it to audio is because that'll use less bandwidth, and that'll make your communication happen more quickly, and it'll decrease the latency of that communication. So those are sort of the things to watch out for.
Awesome. Is there a motto like town hall that you've seen on Facebook, or any candidates that are doing a really good job of actually like live streaming some of these Facebook chats or events?
Yeah, I mean, not off the top of my head, honestly. I can't say that I've spent a lot of time watching some of these more political live streams, but I normally look to the bigger institutions as like examples of what could be done, at least not what has to be done, but like what is being done on a budget of like $100,000 or something per event, because they will typically be more free to innovate and experiment. So I've looked at some performances that the Kennedy Center has done recently virtually. They had a couple of interesting things. I know AOC has been doing live streams on and off, so I think hers are generally pretty good. I know the Bernie campaign, or I guess it's now like the Bernie, Friends of Bernie Sanders, whatever, did a movie viewing event where they had a couple speakers. I think Danny Glover and someone else were talking about a movie about Eugene Debs back in maybe June or July. So that something else. But apart from that, I don't really have any like here you should go follow these people. I mean, there are smaller organizations who are some more sort of innovation in this space. I know Pop Up Magazine, they do some really cool virtual event live streams now that they're not doing any more in-person events. And then if I have any more suggestions, I can send them your way, and maybe that can be part of the description of the video.
Awesome. Have you worked on any blended events where it's both physical and virtual at the same time? And can you tell me a little bit about your experience with those?
Yeah, so I would reframe that conversation as more of live versus pre-recorded, and doing a hybrid of those events, because I think that's sort of where we're going towards, and that's at least our reality right now. Like in the US, we just can't do in-person events. So when we're thinking about should an event be pre-recorded or live, one of the biggest considerations is what will happen during the event that might need to change, at a moment's notice. Like, is there some piece of news that might break right before that we have to acknowledge, or that we might have to swap a speaker in or out to do? And if there's not, then maybe there's a strong case to make the event pre-recorded. And that's actually my preference for virtual events. So when you have a pre-recorded event, it's essentially as though you are compiling a huge video made up of smaller videos, and you're editing it together, and then you're mastering it and putting it out onto YouTube or Facebook as a premiere. And what the premiere function allows you to do on either of those two websites is essentially stream a pre-recorded video, but make it seem to your audience as though it's happening live. So YouTube will tell you that, hey, this is a premiere, and that indicates to you as the viewer that, oh, I'm watching something that was pre-recorded, but I can't fast forward in the video, so it feels live. And you still have that live chat functionality on YouTube or Facebook, so that you as the viewer can interact with other people who are watching this for the first time. But it doesn't let you fast forward, so you can't see what the big reveal is at the end, or who the special guest speaker is, or whatever the case might be. And premieres are great because it allows for a lot of stability and reliability as the producer. So typically when we do huge live streams, we have one person who's running the primary stream, meaning what's being sent to YouTube or Facebook or whatever your platform is, as the main feed. And then we have someone else who's running the backup stream, which is a stream that's nearly identical to the primary stream, except if the primary one goes down, then the backup one is the one that gets picked up, and that's what your viewers will end up seeing. And that's because internet connections are just unreliable sometimes. And I know for one event, we had our primary streaming engineers who all had outages in their internet the day before the show, and we were all scrambling to find backups for that. So it can definitely be just crazy and stressful to do a live event. And so I would always recommend going the pre-recorded route if you have the option. And there are definitely ways that you can use platforms, apart from YouTube or Facebook, to do that sort of streaming that still allows for a pre-recorded event format. But I've actually done a few events where we had a mix of live and pre-recorded content. And the idea was that we would have a few testimonials and a few sort of ad placements here and there that we had to show during the show. But then we also had a few moments where we had maybe comedians go on and do a live set. I think the event that I'm thinking of in particular, we had a group of audience members who had paid extra to be sort of made fun of by a group of comedians. And so they would be featured in this Zoom live event. And so that obviously had to be done live because they were watching the event, and then they were sort of promoted to be panelists in this Zoom webinar, and the comedians would poke fun at them, and then we would take them back down to attendee mode. But they were also watching the pre-recorded content in that same Zoom webinar. So that's an example of sort of a live and pre-recorded hybrid event.
That's amazing. Do you have any last advice, insights for someone who would want to get into this business? Let's say if they were doing advanced work or were field organizers, what's the best way to transition to being a virtual advanced person?
Sure, yeah. So I would say watch as many virtual events as you can and figure out what excites you the most about those. So is it the production aspect of preparing the videos? Is it lining up the speakers and making sure that they know what they're going to say? Is it thinking through the logistics and making sure that, hey, we have 10 minutes for this and 5 minutes for this, and does that really need to be 15 minutes, or can it be 4 or whatever? So all of those roles are definitely things that are needed in the industry right now. And I mean, there are some organizations who are doing it on a sort of per event basis. So you could definitely think about being a contractor for hire with different clients, or you could go and work for someone like, I think Act Blue is doing a lot of these. So they're probably in need of streaming engineers or other folks. I'm hiring contractors right now for technical director and backstage manager positions, as well as a few other roles. So please reach out to me. My firm is called Dangerously Persistent, and we're a production studio that focuses mostly on progressive and socialist causes and events. And beyond that, I would say see if there are any organizations who you already have connections with who might be thinking about this jump from from in-person to virtual events, and seeing if maybe they need help. And maybe you can reach out and offer your services.
That's great. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Feel free to plug your company and the positions you're hiring once again, if you want.
Yeah. So my company is Dangerously Persistent. Our website is dangerouslypersistent.com. And you can email me. The email is just b@dangerouslypersistent.com. So that's be@dangerouslypersistent.com. And I'm looking for everyone with all sorts of experience. So even if you've never done a virtual event before, but you have the tenacity and the willingness to learn and the curiosity, and you're really detail oriented and organized, or some combination of those, I'd love to talk with you more and see if there's a fit.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, you definitely taught me a lot, and hopefully my arena spotlight events will be much better in the future after this meeting. And yeah, thank you so much for giving us your thoughts and your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for your time.